play and call it work.
Very recently, I actually went to the Nova Open and participated in their GT and got a little bit of a first-hand experience of what it's like to play in a grand tournament. It was a lot of fun, got to see a bunch of different lists, got to see a lot of lists that we don't normally get to see in-house here, and I figured I'd take that experience with me back to the studios, share it with you guys, and also start a little bit of a series on, well, the tournament scene, local metas, and the gigantic skew lists that are out there right now. In this first video, I'm going to be going over the Nova Open's rule set, their premiere, what they were required for your lists, what was required for the tables to be built, how the scoring was done, the game types that we went into, and then in the vault, I'm going to go over the list that I took and do a little bit of a breakdown for that and give you guys a bit of a once-over as to why I took the list that I took. So, by signing up for the 2007 Nova Open GT Grand Tournament, you actually get a nice little package here. It has all the different rules and layouts for it. A lot of stuff is very basic to what you'd see in a normal tournament. Things like your miniatures do need to have painted, at least 3-color minimum. Try to keep WYSIWYG as much as you possibly can. No proxies, and if you do have to proxy, it has to be for a model that's not currently available. So models that don't actually exist, like Malefic Lords, you have to find a appropriate proxy for it. So things like that. Going through this really quickly, the first time I got it was a little bit harder to take in because they have a bunch of different policies in here. You have your painted models, converted and counts as models. The army list itself, you have to actually bring 9 copies of the army list because it was a 3-day event. There was 3 days on the first day, or sorry, 3 games on the first day, 3 games on the second day, and then 2 games on the last day. And so by the end of it, you're done playing 8 games. At the point when you get to the table, you actually have to give your opponent the army list and go over it in detail like that. So, along with that, there's basing your models. Every model does have to have some sort of a base. Judges do have permission to basically remove models if they feel they are not well painted or not included properly, or not represented properly to the army. Basically all that. If there's any special rules for miniature that you're bringing, like if it's Forge World, you have to provide the rules for that. So a lot of people are actually bringing printouts for Forge World models and stuff. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff in there. But starting off with actually section 3 on here, the tournament scoring and awards. The Nova Open's 40K GT awards were things like Renaissance Man, Virtuoso, Tournament Champion, Battle Master, Hobby Ace, Second to One, and Bracket Champions. So the Renaissance Man was the best overall, so you had a very good score. It was also about your appearance and your competitiveness. So it was kind of a all-around scoring system. So did you do really well in the tournament? Did your army look very nice, and did people enjoy playing against you? As long as you had high scores on all those, you qualified for Renaissance Man. I was actually the second place runner-up for that. Darn! Anyway, there's also Virtuoso, which is the best painted army, not even close to winning that one. Tournament Champion, so the winner of the first tournament bracket and the best general win-loss rating. So to give you an example, to explain what they mean by brackets, by the end of the 5th game, depending on where you placed in the scoring system, you actually got placed into one of 13 brackets. And obviously bracket number 1 is all the top players, 2 in 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. By the end of the 5th game, I was put in the 5th bracket. So by the time it was all said and done, when I got put into the 5th bracket, I was actually 26th out of the 230 some odd people that were in the tournament. So I was pretty proud of myself for that one. Battle Master, player who scored the highest battle points. So best general battle points. Battle points were essentially just how did you do in the scoring overall? Did you get a lot of wins? Did you do really well in your games? Did you play according to the scenarios? From there we have the Hobby Ace, so the 2 runner-ups to the Virtuoso, so basically the second best painted army. Second to None, which is second place in the first tournament bracket, and then the Tournament Bracket Champions, which is the winner of all the tournament brackets. So there was 13 winners for that one. So that was kind of cool. From there, there's a section 4 in here called the Overall Mission Guidance and Rules. Now, the first thing that I saw when I looked at this and was really, really happy about was that they actually had a set standard for the terrain on the boards. It wasn't like every board you go to is going to have a different setup. I know a lot of local stores do it where every table has a different setup, and basically you don't know what you're going to be getting into. Every single table at the GT was identical. It was fantastic because it meant that people could actually build their lists with the table in mind, which is something that I did, and I'll explain that in the Vault video. But what they did for that was they actually had the full table And in all four corners, there was either a hill or a ruin of some kind, I believe. It was, yep, so hill, heavy line of sight blockage, and then a ruin that gave some partial line of sight blockage. In the center of the table, in your deployment zone, there was a line of sight blockage, some sort of forest or swamp or anything like that. There was a area. And then in the dead center of the board, there was two very large line of sight blocking, impassable pieces of terrain. So very large, can't see through it, can't shoot through it. They had to do a couple counts as because they ran out, but a lot of terrain like that. So it led to a lot of people being able to kind of tailor their lists a little bit to accommodate for the board, which was actually very nice. Moving on from the overall guide and stuff like that, there is the section here for legal army lists. Now, after going to the Nova and checking out a lot of the different tournaments that are going on right now, there are a lot of different legal army lists and ways that they're trying to regulate people so they don't skew in one hard direction. The main one that I was seeing right now is the Malefic Lord skew. Just going off topic a little bit for that right now, the Malefic Lord is actually probably one of the cheapest and most powerful models in the game. It is a Forge World Renegade and Heretic model. It's an HQ choice. It's 30 points. It counts as a Psyker. It has 4 wounds, a 4-up invulnerable save, and it has access to a power called Warp Flux, which allows you to, it's essentially a stronger smite where you don't have to choose the closest target within 12, or sorry, you don't have to choose the closest target within 12. You can pick any target within 12 and cause D3 mortal wounds. If you happen to target a vehicle with that power, it does D6 mortal wounds. So that's pretty hefty right there, especially for 30 points. You can fill in all 3 of your, HQ slots for a brigade detachment or battalion detachment, whichever one's the bigger one. I always mix those up, for 90 points, which is unheard of considering a lot of the HQ choices right now are 100 plus. So the fact that you can fill in all 3 of those for what somebody has to spend plus for a single HQ choice is ridiculous. On top of that, they have a couple other things, like if they happen to perils, they get stronger. A bunch of different things tactics wise, but the fact is it was a 30-point model. There was a lot of them at this tournament and people had a hard time dealing with them. Colossus Assassins were in short supply, let me put it that way. So there's a lot of tournaments now that after seeing what happened at the Nova and people bringing these models that they're trying to regulate that a little bit, and I'll get into that in future videos. But right now for the legal army list, the Nova Open operated at 2,000 points. You had to bring the 9 copies of your army list, and the rules were as such: make sure it is GW legal, which meant it had to be in a brigade, had to be in a detachment. You only got the command points available to you. You couldn't skew in any which way, and you had to make sure that you followed the keyword chart for your detachments. Now, they didn't follow the ITC keyword chart, which it still kind of bothered me a little bit because I don't really care for the Imperium keyword. It covers way too many armies and gives a lot of flexibility to people, which means that it's very easy for someone to start skewing in one direction, such as bringing Guilliman, Celestine, Assassins. It's just the fact that all those are available to somebody with the Imperium keyword, and as well as Guard as well. It definitely skewed in that direction, so they're trying to avoid that a little bit. So going on from that, we have the core rules, everything like that. It all followed the exact same thing. The one rule in here is that understrength units had to be included in the auxiliary support detachment. So if you brought any form of an understrength unit, whether it was you didn't have the models for it, you didn't want to bring a full unit, you didn't want to bring anything like that, you did have to suffer the -1 command point. So there was that to it. And then from there we go on to the general missions, concepts, rules, and terminology. For a lot of it, it's just make sure you follow the GW big rule book. But we go on to section 5.2, which is how to play the mission selection and pre-game process. Now this is something I absolutely loved that they set up. It made it very clear how you started every game, how everything worked, the order of operations for things. There was no confusion. It basically meant that you got to playing within about 5 minutes of meeting your opponent. So the first thing you do is you swap your list with your opponent and study what you're up against. This gives you a chance to actually double check over your opponent's list to make sure it is legal. You did have to bring in a legal list. It did get checked by the judges at the, prior to going into the tournament, but obviously judges do happen to miss a few things. There was a couple things that I caught for a couple of the Grey Knight players where they were using Battle Scribe, which at the time was allowing Grand Masters to take 2 psychic powers. I had to correct a few people on that, but other than that, for the most part, the judges did a phenomenal job making sure everything was correct. So you got a chance to swap your list with your opponent, double check everything. Then what you do is you privately select and note down your warlord traits, psychic powers, and relics. Once that's done, you then reveal it to your opponent what you're taking so they know what warlord trait you have, what psychic powers you have, and what relics you have. Then you both take a moment to study over that. And then what you do is you privately select down and note a primary mission from those available in the mission. What this means is that they had 4 missions available in the Nova Open that you could play with things like, hang on, I have it right here. We had Hordes and Heroes, the Relic, Scouring, and Crusade. Now, these all had a little bit of a variance to them. What this means is that there was 2 different missions available in each mission. Or sorry, 2 different objectives available in each mission. The first one would be a progressive one, which meant that every turn between turns 2 and turn 6, you were able to score points. So for example, if you were to play the Relic would be worth 1 point, objectives in your deployment zone would be worth 1 point, objectives in your opponent's deployment zone would be worth 1 point, up to a maximum of 3 per turn. And between turn 2 and turn 6, you could score those points up to a maximum of 9. So those are your primary objective points. The other way is a endgame mission where the Relic would be worth 5 points. Both of your objectives would be worth 1 point, and both of your objectives, opponent's objectives would be worth 2 points. So it's more of a, at the end game, where if you think you have a good chance of tabling your opponent or pushing your opponent into a corner or preventing them from doing anything, you're going to want to go for the end game one, because that means you can focus most of your efforts into killing your opponent, and at the end of the game, jumping to the objectives as you need. This is the one that I usually chose for the list that I brought, and again, check out the Vault video for info on that one. Then what you do is you go ahead and you privately select and note down 3 secondary missions. Now, there is a universal pool of secondary missions. There's actually 12 of them. I'm going to go over them right now. Normally in a game of 40k, if you were to do a Eternal Crusade, you have 3 secondaries. You have Slay the Warlord, First Blood, and Linebreaker. Obviously, some matchups, these are not going to be feasible. In some of the matchups, these are going to be next to impossible because of just the way your army's set up. So what they did is they added an additional 9 options to the list, and it gives you that point where you can pick 3 of them depending on what you're going up against. It's made it so that you didn't have to worry about getting skewed in one way or another, and it actually prevented or mitigated a lot of the skew lists, or not skew lists, but bad matchups. So after you got the first ones like Slay the Warlord, Linebreaker, and First Blood, you have an additional one called Cull the Hordes, where you have to destroy at least 60 enemy models. This works really well if you're going up against any Horde army like Orcs or Guard, Infantry Guard, Nids, somebody spamming a lot of dudes in any of the other armies like Demons. Gave you that option. It could be very easy to achieve. There was a couple of games that I actually managed to pull that one off just because I looked at what my opponent had and thought, I can do this. The next one we have is Heart of the Matter. End the game with your Warlord within 6 inches of the table center. That one's a little bit more tricky, mainly because the table center is in between 2 line of sight blocking pieces of terrain, which means a lot of people would be baited into trying to go for that one because it's hard to shoot the Warlord when he's in between those 2 pieces of terrain. Sad thing is, a lot of people are going to try and kill your Warlord, so it's very difficult to get that one. After that, we have Shoot the Big Ones. Destroy at least 5 enemy models worth 100 points or more. There was a little bit of confusion with this one. A lot of people were going for enemy units. It does specifically say enemy model. So if somebody has a unit worth 105 points, does not count if you kill that. You have to go after things like vehicles, monstrous creatures, named characters, anything that has a point value of 100 or more. You have to kill at least 5 of those throughout the game, and you get yourself your secondary. And then we have Strike the Rank and File, destroy every troop unit. Now there's a note for this one. If your opponent has no troop units, you achieve this one automatically. There was one opponent that I actually scored this against. I looked at his list and went, he doesn't have this. I'm grabbing that because that's an easy 2 points. Next up we have Marked for Death. Immediately after revealing the primary and secondary choices, clearly mark one of your opponent's army lists, units in their army list and destroy this unit. The reason why I liked and hate this one was because you actually had to pick and gave your opponent the chance to deploy it however they wanted to prevent you from getting those points. Came in quite a bit actually. So it does mean that you're able to kind of bait your opponent a little bit into saying, okay, I know your entire army revolves around this particular model, whether it's Guilliman or a Morkannog providing a shield or some other named character. You're able to pick that and basically force your opponent to say, you know, I'm not sure if I want this guy up front doing the damage he's supposed to do, or if I want him hiding out in the back, because I do not want to give my opponent those 2 points, because that could actually prevent you from winning the game. Next up we have Moment of Bloodshed. Destroy at least 3 enemy units in a single turn. There was a lot of people who pulled this one off, and I thought it was very impressive. I never took it because I never trusted that I would have the opportunity throughout the game to actually kill 3 units in a single turn, so I kind of steered away from it, but that was just the list choice I had. A lot of people jumped on that one against me, and you'll see that in the Vault video there. Number 10, First Strike. This is one that kind of threw me off a little bit. So the First Strike one is destroy a unit on the first turn. Note, you cannot combine this with number 1, which is First Blood. So the thing is, you have First Blood, and you have First Strike. They don't stack with each other, so why would you ever take First Blood when you can take First Strike and not have to worry about making sure you get the first turn, first kill? Just a thought there. So a lot of people almost always took that one because it was very, very easy for everybody to kill at least one of your opponent's units on the first turn. It also meant that whenever somebody did that, if your opponent didn't take First Strike, there's a good chance they're going to be playing very defensively and trying to prevent you from getting those 2 points. Number 11, we have Big Game Hunter. Destroy the most expensive unit in your opponent's army. Now note on this one, you may not combine it with number 3, which is Slay the Warlord, or number 8, which is Marked for Death. So what they were trying to do here is not stack different ones. So what you could have done there, if they didn't put the stipulation, it was go Big Game Hunter, Marked for Death, and Slay the Warlord. If your Warlord was the most expensive model you had, you decide to mark it for death, and you get Big Game Hunter. You kill that Warlord, you score yourself 6 secondary points, because each one of these is worth 2 points. Then number 12, the last one we have here, is a Titan Slayer. Destroy a Titanic vehicle during the game. You earn 2 points for each Titanic vehicle you destroy, though you may not exceed the 6-point totals for all secondaries. And again, you can't combine this with number 3, number 8, or number 11. So you couldn't combine this with Slay the Warlord, you couldn't do it with Mark for Death, and you also couldn't do it with Big Game Hunter. So, going back to the how to play, you get to the point where you go ahead and secretly mark down all your secondary missions. You and your opponent take a moment, make sure you have what you want, reveal them to your opponents that you and your opponent both know what you are trying to accomplish. Once that's done, then you go ahead and jump over to rolling a d6 with your opponent, and the winner gets to choose which deployment zone they want. Number 7 is place objectives if required for the mission, beginning with the winner of number 6. So person who deployed first, person who picks the deployment zone gets to deploy their first objective. Then number 8 is alternate unit deployment, beginning with the loser of number 6. So if you won the roll off, you get to pick which zone you want. Your opponent gets to deploy first. And once the deployment is all over, roll a d6 and add 1 to the roll if you finish deploying first. Winner gets to go first. So it's no more the first person done deploying gets to go first. This actually changed the game quite a bit, where it brought in a lot of things where people, for example, guard players, did not have to worry about min dropping. They would have 20 to 30 drops on a board just because they didn't care about the +1. They still had a very good chance of going first. It was not, there's no way you're going first unless you roll a 6 to seize. Once that's all said and done, you get to once the winner of the roll-off for who gets to go first is done, they get to decide who's going to go first and who's going to go second. The person who is going to second may the player going second may elect to roll a die and attempt to seize the initiative. So even though you're still having that roll-off with the +1 to see who gets to go first, that just gives you the choice of who's going to go first. Then once that's all said and done, your opponent still gets the opportunity to roll that d6, roll a 6, seize the initiative, and go first. Once all is said and done, the round begins and you get to start the battle. Sounds like a lot after your first game. Totally makes sense and is an absolute blast. I very much liked the whole secondary aspect to it because it added a new way of playing. It was no longer you're limited to the standard 3, First Blood, Slay the Warlord, Line Breaker. You got a chance to alter your secondary objectives to try and beat your opponent. Now, going on to scoring for missions and things like that, you get 9 points if you get a perfect game for your primary missions, which means if you score the 9 points for your primaries. You get 6 points if you get a perfect secondary, which means you score all 3 of your secondaries. That puts you at 15. A perfect game is 19 points. Now, the last way that you can score those last 4 points is by something called a tertiary, which is between turns 2 and turn 5. 6. 2, 3, 4, 5. No, turn 5. So between turn 2 and turn 5, as long as you kill one of your opponent's units during that battle round, doesn't matter if it's my turn or your turn, as long as you kill a unit, you will score a point for your tertiary. So, there was a couple of games that I played. Pretty much every single game that I won, every single game that I won, I did get a perfect 19 points. If you and your opponent are still playing off and it comes down to you have 19 points and I have 18 points, I lost, I don't get to take that 18 points into the next round for my total scoring. I automatically drop down to 12 because a loss can only max out at 12 points. So a lot of people were not complaining, were competing, and one of the big things in the tournament was that when you're playing your opponent, you're not just playing to beat that opponent, you're playing for your total points. So there was a number of games that I played where I would be playing somebody and I'd be turn 3 just about to table them, and I'd have to stop because I knew if I tabled them, I would lose out on 2 tertiaries, I could possibly lose out on a secondary, even because a table does not automatically mean you win, and on top of that, it also means that you could lose out on a lot of points for the overall tournament. So, a couple of things to keep in mind there when going over all of this. Then the last thing that we have here is the actual missions themselves. There's 4 different ones here. The first one they have is Crusade, which was you either have Dawn of War deployment or Frontline Assault. Your opponent, basically the person who won the roll-off, gets to pick which type of deployment they want to do. You basically have to place 6 objectives on the table using the following guidelines. Place 4 objectives so that they are 24 inches from the short table edge and 12 inches from the long table edge. Finally, place 2 more objectives so that they are 12 inches from the short table edge and 24 inches from the long table edge. And this is where we get into you can pick the long game or you can pick the end game mission type. Primary mission number 1 is you accumulate 2 points for each objective you control at the end of the game. If you control more objectives than your opponent at the end of the game, you earn an additional point. So, it adds up that way. The progressive one is between turns 2 and turn 6. If you control at least 2 objectives, you score a point. If you control 1 more objective than your opponent, you score an additional point. If you control 2 or more objectives than your opponent, you score an additional point. So if you're holding 2 objectives and your opponent's not holding any, you score 3 points. If your opponent was holding 1, you would only score 2 points. If you're just holding 2 objectives and your opponent's holding the rest of the table, you only score 1 point on that turn. So kind of had to keep that in mind, which made people have to play a little bit to the progressive style. Then we go on to the Scouring, where each player places 3 objectives. 2 objectives must go in the deployment zone following the normal placement rules. So the center of the table, or center of the objective has to be at least 6 inches away from a table edge and 12 inches away from each other. The third must go at least 30 inches from your table edge and within your opponent's table half. Just before the roll sees the initiative, each player will randomly determine the value of the 3 objectives in his or her table half. 1 objective must be worth 3 points, 1 is worth 2, and 1 is worth 1. Objectives must be placed at least 6 inches away from the table edge and 12 inches away from each other. Okay. Primary mission number 1 is you score equal to the value of the objectives you control at the end of the game. So that seems pretty straightforward. The progressive one is if you control at least 3 or more total points worth of objectives, you score a point. If you control 5 or more total points, you score 2 points. If you control 7 or more total points, you score 3 points. These accumulate. So that's the Scouring. Moving on from that, we go on to the Relic. So the Relic was pretty straightforward. There are 5 objectives on the table, 2 in your deployment zone, 2 in your opponent's deployment zone, 1 in the center, which is the Relic. They did have guidelines on where to set up your objectives. I think it was like 12 and 24 again, so they were in the corners. Progressive style though, endgame 1 was each of your home objectives is worth 1 point if you control them at the end of the game. Each of your opponent's home objectives are worth 2 points if you control them at the end of the game. And the Relic is worth 5 points. So that's a big one right there. And the progressive one is if you control your home objectives, you score a point. If you control one of your home objectives, if you control 1 more home objective than your opponent controls of his own, you score a point. And if you control the Relic / center objective, you score a point. So if you're holding 2, your opponent's holding 1, and you got the Relic, that's 3 points. Pretty straightforward. The last one we have here is Hordes and Heroes. Place objectives on the 4 objectives on the table, 1 in each of the table quarters. So these ones are pretty much identical. It was kill as much as you possibly can. The only thing that was kind of different about it was that if you select primary mission number 1, you control objectives if the combined power level of each unit, at least within 1 inch of the model, exceeds your opponent's combined power level. And then if you pick number 2, it's just regular control stuff. So for the endgame 1, destroy more of your opponent's units than they destroy of yours. That's 3 points. Destroy at least half of your opponent's total army unit count. That's 3 points. At the end of the game, control more objectives than your opponent. That's 3 points. The other variation here is destroy more of your opponent's point value than they destroy of yours. 3 points. Number 2 is destroy at least 50% of your opponent's point total value. 3 points. And then number 3 is at the start of turns 2 and turn 6, control more objectives than your opponent. You score 1 point to a maximum of 3. So a little bit different right there. That one kind of played into it a little bit where you have to kind of know what your opponent's bringing to the table. If they're bringing a lot more power level points, then you want to go with the power level 1. If they're bringing more points, then you want to go with points. So it kind of led its hand to that one a little bit, where if you know what your opponent's bringing, you can kind of game it a little bit and pick which one you need right there. But that does come down to who knows what and what's going to be brought in there. So anyway, that is it for the Nova Open Premiere. I'm going to be loving doing these videos because I love the tournament scene. I had an absolute blast at the GT. It was a lot of fun getting to play against a bunch of different people. Some of the most common lists that I saw there were things like the Smite Spam, that demon army that I was really excited to bring. I had a couple people walk up to me and say, dude, stop talking about that. Like, that was supposed to be on the down low. I was like, well, I didn't talk about Malefic Lords, but now I did, and the internet's gonna hate me. Another thing that I saw was a lot of Guilliman lists. So anybody who brought Guilliman found out very quickly that by having Guilliman within 6 inches of anything with the Ultramarine special rule, got to reroll to hit and reroll to wound with anything Ultramarine that applied, basically any Ultramarine unit. So it applied to vehicles, applied to units, applied to just pretty much anything. So a lot of people were building little bastions with Razorbacks and putting Guilliman in there just to get rerolls on everything like that. List I took was Grey Knights. Again, I'll talk about that in the Vault video. I'm trying to point to where the link would be, but I'm assuming it's going to be down there. So we'll talk about my list there and talk about why I brought it and show you kind of the math hammer behind that one a little bit. A couple other lists that I saw there, little odd games here and there, were Orcs. A couple people brought Orc spam lists. One player brought an absolutely gorgeous Eldar army, but it was completely flyer. So we brought things like a Cobra and Wave Serpents and just all kinds of crazy stuff like that. Had a lot of fun playing against him. So I'll talk about that in the Vault video, guys. Anyway, that's going to be it for the opening video on our tournament scene. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think of this, if you happen to play in the GT or play in any larger tournaments, what your experience is with playing with that. Also, let me know what you guys think of us kind of trying to cover a little bit more of the tournament scene and getting into the whole tournament aspect of 40K. In future videos, I'm actually planning on going to the Renegade Open, so I'm going to be doing a series of videos on the list I'm taking for that, why I'm taking it, as well as the premiere for the Renegade Open, which means I'm going to have to go through an entire pamphlet like this again with completely different rules, different scenarios, and different list building restrictions. So look forward to that in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay awesome, and happy wargaming.